So first up, we have Jared. Jared has been scuba diving in 3 oceans and proclaims the Arctic Ocean to be the coldest. I believe that. He has taken a falconry course, which is a story I feel like I want to hear later. And despite having the bravery to take the stage tonight, and from what I understand, speak on many a podcast, Jared is a huge introvert. So please join me in welcoming Jared.
Hey, hi everyone, how are we all doing? How are we all doing? There we go. So, quick introduction, I'm Jared. I am first and foremost, and most importantly, a dad. Health, family have always come first and always will, and so I always like to throw that out there because it guides everything I do. I also own an agency called The Think Tank. We are what's known as an omnichannel agency, meaning we use social, digital, in-store media, name a digital screen somewhere, I have access to it. Really, we're trying to help consumer packaged good brands get those people, like all of you, all those consumers, interested in the product and getting them to go all the way from that interest to actually buying and trying and buying the product. And partly because of that agency, I also ended up becoming a founder of a company. It's a company called Wander. We made globally spiced, but not spicy peanut butters. And so that's the story I'm sharing with you today. So the inspiration behind Wander came from my kitchen. I'm an avid cook. I grew up in my kitchen. I was homeschooled for a lot of my elementary years, which meant I spent a lot of time around food with my mom, who are also, both my parents were kind of hippies, so I grew up eating kale and all this plant-based stuff that everyone's all excited about now. I've been eating it since I was a kid. It's gotten much better. Still not great, but much better. And I was literally cooking one day, and I was making a Thai sauce, very big quotations. One I'm sure we've all made before in probably our undergrad days. Some peanut butter, a bit of soy sauce, maybe a little bit of lime juice. And I was warming it up to make it easier to pour over my noodles, and I went, man, I wish this had some ginger, and maybe some lime leaf, and maybe a little lemongrass, those really authentic flavors. And for whatever reason, my brain went, why can't you mix them into peanut butter? And I turned to my wife and I said, hey, what do you think? And she goes, go do research, go figure this out. This is what you do. And she's right, this is exactly what I do. So starting from that Thai inspiration, I started off with the first thing, which is product market fit. So I went out and did a ton of research. I looked across the entire world looking for other brands doing this. Peanut butter is really a North American invention. Peanuts, global. Peanut butter, it's really here. And there's a couple companies doing it in the US, and one of them I got to talk to at great length. It was absolutely amazing, shared all sorts of insights. I also did a lot of product development. So I did about 50 different test batches in my own kitchen, and then, so this would have been from August to December of 2020. 2020. And so right as we were heading up to Christmas, I put a post out to all my friends and said, hey, I need someone to come and test this product. Tell me if I'm absolutely crazy or not. And so I had over 40 households, over 120 participants, who all filled out anonymous surveys and gave me hypercritical feedback about my product. And the best part of this is during the pandemic, so I got to go and see everybody to drop off these samples. And I got really blunt and honest with them and said, look, I'm about to potentially finance this massive piece of machinery that if this goes badly, is gonna put my daughter's future at risk. You may not care about me, but think about my daughter. Look at the kid card. So I got great feedback, and it was all very much aligned with what I was already planning on doing. There's all the R&D, lots and lots of it, used QR codes. I tried to leverage tech, because why wouldn't you? It was a whole shebang. We finally got to my first production run. So here's my daughter in my SUV with peanut butter and spices and jars and all sorts of other stuff jammed around her, and we went off to find a facility, and we started making it. And honestly, at that point, things were going great. I felt good. Then things started to go a little bit wrong, and they kind of slowly piled up over the next 18 months, little chips at a time. So that didn't work out right, but the first big mistake I made was I didn't start marketing until about a month and a half before we launched. Now, my go-to-market strategy had marketing going for 6 months prior. Again, I run an agency. This is what I do for my clients on a daily basis. But when it's your own thing, life gets in the way, and you all of a sudden get caught up trying to figure out the logistics of how you're going to produce an allergen in a semi-allergen-free facility. It gets really complicated. And so that was a big mistake, because one of the biggest errors I made was that there wasn't enough awareness about us before we started pushing. And it set us back months in our growth because instead of just being able to have this awareness to start selling, I was spending a huge amount of time doing education and raising awareness. Retail is also a lot tougher than I thought it was. I've spent the last almost my entire career around food and beverage brands, and I thought I understood the challenges going in, and I've got great contacts, but it was really tough breaking in. Margins are a huge factor. It's hyper competitive to get that shelf space because if you're going in, it means someone else is losing. So you've got to convince somebody that you're better. And that was really tough. It also didn't help, this was during the pandemic, so we also had a couple lockdowns, meaning nobody was going into stores, and we were really just listed in independents that relied heavily on foot traffic. So lockdown means no foot traffic, means no sales. And we went through 3 months of sub 20 jar sold months. Really brutal. I'll also use this point right now to emphasize, during all of this, I still had the agency. My wife also has a full-time job. And I'll get to talk to more about this at the end, but there is absolutely zero chance in hell I would quit everything I'm doing right now to jump in food and bev full-time without having a massive amount of cash behind me. And so while this wasn't going so well, I was panicking a bit because I don't want to see my baby die. Not my baby, the company die. Separate those two. But at the same time, you know, I had other income, so it was okay. Lockdowns killed us. Conflicting priorities. Surprisingly, not the agency. The agency was okay. I have an amazing team there. They're the real experts at what we do. But it was more I have a family. And I started off with health and family come first and foremost. And at the end of the day, time with my daughter is the most valuable thing I have. So there was a bunch of different things and events that I couldn't get to because I had to be on dad duty that night because my wife had an obligation. And then finally, the big thing that finally sunk us after everything was inflation. You can handle small increases of a few percent. Heading into our last production run, I was looking at about, on average, about a 13% increase. The projections going into this year were over 30% across everything. It was wild. And then I just didn't have enough of 4 key things. And this is where I fucked up on all 4 of these, and I knew better going in. And so I had great advisors who should have smacked me across the back of the head much harder, to be quite honest. So first and foremost, if you're going into food and beverage or any type of CPG, you need to have at least a 50 to 60% margin on your wholesale price. So that's the price that you're selling it to the retailer. So that means that $10 thing you see on shelf, you're selling it for $5, for argument's sake. Then out of that remaining $5, you have all sorts of other fun fees. Some of them are upfront, like slotting fees and listing fees. That's just paying for the right to be able to negotiate to have your stuff on shelf. Right? You're paying upfront for that. That's tens of thousands of dollars per SKU. So if you have 5 SKUs, you could be paying $50K upfront. Massive amounts of money. You also have a distributor who 10 to 15 is actually low now. It's gone up. And distributors, there's some things going on in the US with KeHE, which is one of the major distributors. There's a bunch of brands who are very angry with them for taking all sorts of extra cash and leveling fees with no recourse. So you got to figure out a way to cover that extra 10, 15%. Your broker's taking 5%. And then marketing, what I do, usually you're looking between 5 and 30% as a startup of your total revenue. And after all that, you still have to make your product. So realistically, when you see a $10 product on shelf, it's being made for sub $2. And if that's shocking to you and you're all of a sudden worried about the quality of your products, you should be. Because I certainly am. And I'm in the space. So that was the first one. I didn't have anywhere close to enough margin on my product. When I started, I was sitting about 47% on my wholesale. By the time this was done, I was down to about 30%. And at that point, you're just not viable. Doesn't make sense to keep going. So I kind of mentioned this before. You need a ton of capital to start. Food and beverage is a really tough space with a lot of expenses. You got your ingredients, you got your shelf space, you have all that other stuff. But say you want to take it really slow. Do what I did, or take my approach. You know, bootstrap it, grow through the farmers markets and events, get some independence. Okay, cool, we can do that for sure. So these events, this was a Christmas market, that was Markets TO downtown, and this was at the zoo actually. Amazing one at the zoo. So that one cost me $150 to attend. That one was actually really cheap for what it was. The other one was $300, that was $150 as well. So you can go and see these founders who are attending an event every weekend, sometimes 2 or 3. So that means they're spending, on average, $500, $600 per weekend to attend all these events. And I can tell you, not all of them are winners. You lose a lot. So you need at least $60K to start. And I would say actually these days, with inflation where things are heading, probably closer to $100. That's why I was saying from the get-go, if you don't have a nest egg or investors or something lined up behind you, if you're looking at food and bev, make sure you're keeping a full-time job. It's actually shocking the number of founders I know now who left corporate jobs to start their food and beverage company who have now taken up side jobs to be able to afford to keep their company afloat. Oh, time. There's never enough time, my friends. There just isn't. The clock keeps clicking. Oh my goodness, keeps ticking away no matter what happens. And when you're starting out, there's a couple different founders. There's Mark from True Local and Mitch from Revita Tea from out in Calgary, and both of them talk about this in different ways. Mark talks about in your first 3 to 5 years of running a business, that business is your life. That's how he frames it up in his book, True Founder, which I highly recommend if you're thinking about starting your first company. It's a must-read in my opinion. Mitch talks about how he dedicated 1,000 days to launching his company, him and his co-founders. And what you can accomplish with that sole focus for 1,000 days. But the key point of both of that is that has to be your sole focus. So, I was at farmers markets. Every single trip you do now becomes a photo opportunity. So we were up in Ottawa with my family, going to see friends. I brought product. I spent probably 4 hours of that trip doing photo shots around Parliament. Going to all sorts of events. This is me speaking in this room at a different event. And then the one over on the right there, the Kick Your Child and Pose, there was a big thing on TikTok months back. Social media, you're going to be the face, you're going to be the one doing all the work. It takes so much time. I can't even tell you how much time. It takes so much time to the point that I've realized I love creating content, but man, do I hate doing it on that type of schedule. It is so demanding. I was spending hours on it. So however much time you think you need more. Not just on creating it all, but also you think you're going to get in shelf in a month, it's probably going to take you 3, maybe 6. Everything takes so much longer than you think it's going to. And finally, the fourth thing that you need a lot of, that I certainly didn't, was you need to be building a brand that has a big purpose. And bigger than that, it's going to power a purpose-driven passion. So if you look at all the brands who are really being successful right now, there's an extra layer of purpose to them. It can be they're a B Corp, it can be that they're upcycling, it can be all sorts of different things, but there's that extra layer above and beyond. And as I said from the very get-go, I started this because I had a cool product that I thought was neat. And I thought maybe solved a small cooking problem, but not really. And underlying all of this, I started because I had a cool product. I come from a family of entrepreneurs, wanted the feather in my cap. I also run an agency where I work with mostly really big brands, but I come from small business. I love small business. And after 2.5, 3 years of trying to develop programs for these small brands and being told, that's an amazing program, just not for us. I got really fed up and said, well, if my theory and secondhand knowledge aren't cutting it, I have to get my hands dirty and go in and figure out what the hell it's like to actually do this journey so I can figure out what the stresses are, what the breakpoints are, and what's going through those founders' heads so I can figure out how to better serve them and support them so they don't crash out and burn. So while at Wander we did have a purpose, a soft purpose, we were donating a minimum of 2% sales, actually turned out to be closer to 7% by the time we were all said and done, to 3 different charities. It was never our forefront. We never really pushed it and promoted it heavily beyond a monthly post saying we had done it. And that was a big mistake. The purpose should have been front, foremost, big and bold. It just wasn't, it's not what I wanted out of the brand. So here's the big learnings. So first and foremost, if you're thinking about starting, just start. Stop making excuses, stop stalling. You don't need to talk to somebody else about it. Just go, get going. Because the sooner you start, the sooner you start to figure out what you know and what you don't know and who you need to go and ask for help. And there's an amazing network in Toronto of all sorts of founders and those who can support founders with any challenge you're having. The second one is do your research and really build out your network. So LinkedIn's an amazing platform. The number of founders on there and the community around it is incredible. There's all sorts of founders community in the GTA as well. And the research is really important. The one thing that a lot of brands I see coming out now are missing is product market fit. They're launching these really super cool products that don't really match what's needed, or they're just replicating what's already there, and there's no point of differentiation. My product actually kind of falls into that to a certain degree as well, as have several other premium specialty peanut butters. So you might have heard of a brand called Fatso. That founder had to sell in March, very regrettably. There's a brand called Elliott's out of the US. They also did a spicy Thai peanut butter. And they're the ones who told me literally every step of their process. Every step. They just shut down in, oh my goodness, it's March as well, as it happens. They're completely done. They're 2 months shy of 10 years of business. They're done. They just shut up shop. Very sad. So make sure you do your product market fit so you know that there's actually demand for your product. Start sharing your story early. There's a product out of the US called Effin' Good Snacks. run by a guy, Damien Law. Go follow him on LinkedIn and go dig back into his history. He has shared his entire journey of launching this product. He pre-sold, I think it was 4,000 units before he'd even done a production run. And that's amazing. And that's a great strategy that I think every founder should be looking at. Getting that revenue coming in quick, early, and have it all lined up. Knowing your numbers is vital. The number of founders I talk to and I ask them what their margin is and they don't know off the top of their head is shocking. It's one of the biggest numbers you need to know. You need to know what your turn rates are. You need to know what your velocities are at shelf. You need to know why you're different than everybody else. It is so critical that you get that all locked down. It's one that I had to a degree, but not as much as I should have. And then finally, the last one, you need so much more capital and time than you think you do. So I'll be very honest, when I started this, I figured I needed about 10K for my first year and another 10 to get us to a point where I'd have enough revenue coming in where I wouldn't have to sink more capital. And as I shared on the earlier slide, you need like 60 to 100K. So my problem, and I'm warning you all this now, when you're doing your research, Canada and the US are not the same. You would think I would have known this from watching Target come up here and like implode. But in the US, you can probably still get away, these days probably with 20K, you could still do it. There's a peanut butter company down there called Nerdy Nuts, and they started with 10K in a peanut butter machine, like a grinder. Now that grinder they bought for 700 and had it fixed up for an extra, I think it was 200. That same machine up here cost several $1,000s. These are not the same markets. So if you're going to be looking at other companies to try and figure out how much capital you need to start, make sure they're Canadian. And the best one is if you can go and talk to someone in that space and ask them, how much did you start with and was that enough? What do you think I need to get to that stage? Most founders are pretty open about talking about not what they started with necessarily, but certainly what they think you need to start with. And that's it, y'all.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jared. That was awesome. We have time for a few questions.